因為佢嘅主心為世界前嚟攞出主動最中心嘅都講到ya fue tentang untuk menuju sampai Chile sedati penting sedati untuk dapat mengatasi. Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming to this hot day, and I would like to introduce our SFT President Mr. Tenzin Bajila and his colleague Mr. Chibala from Students of Free Tibet. And without taking much time, I would like to have Tendola take the mic and explain why we are here today.
First of it, good evening everyone. It's really nice to be here in Philadelphia after a really long time. I think most Tibetans who live in the United States have been to Philadelphia because everybody wants to see Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell and the history of the United Nations, the Declaration of Independence, and the American struggle for independence from British colonial rule. All of these struggles symbolized in these buildings, structures, the bell, this park, all of this holds a lot of meaning for us Tibetans. And one thing that I would like all of us to remember today is more than 2 centuries ago, when the United States, led by its founding fathers, was declaring independence from British rule, Tibet was already an independent nation. Tibet was already a free country at that time. We had our own government, our own currency, our own postal system, our own language, culture, history. But unfortunately, in the years that followed, like many other countries around the world, Tibet was also invaded and influenced by several colonial powers. There was the Mongols, the Manchus, and now the Chinese imperialist power. And the reason why we wanted to bring this recreation of the 1913 Declaration of Independence to Philadelphia is because the 13th Dalai Lama gave us this incredible gift in 1909 when the Manchu troops invaded Tibet. It prompted the 13th Dalai Lama to flee into exile. So this is not our first exile in history. Tibetans and the Tibetan government and the Dalai Lama has been exiled before. We have lived as refugees before in the past. So this is not new to us. And before, out of our exile and out of our state of refugees, we have returned to Tibet, victorious and established a sovereign nation. And it was in 1912, at the collapse of the Manchu Empire, that the 13th Dalai Lama was able to return to Tibet. And in 1913, on February 13th, 1913, he issued the Proclamation of Tibetan Independence. And this right here is a giant version, a giant recreation of that declaration. Because although after 1913, Tibet's independence was restored, after 1913, Tibet was once again a sovereign nation exercising its own power. In spite of that, the Chinese government invaded Tibet in 1949. And with this giant recreation, we intend to make clear, not only to the Chinese government, but to everyone around the world, to every government, to every institution, to every organization, to every individual, that Tibet was an independent nation in the past, For most of our history, Tibet has been a sovereign country, and this is what we intend to establish in the future. Tibet has the right to self-determination, the right to independence. And today, I want to request all of us to support us in this campaign to achieve two things, by practicing two things. The way I look at it, there are two ways to declare independence. And I'm asking all of you to help us in declaring Tibetan independence vocally and practically. And by vocally, every time we go to an official, to an elected representative, we can bring a copy of this scroll and offer it to them that Tibet was an independent country in the past. No matter what the United States government's current position on the issue of Tibet, whether they support freedom or self-determination or autonomy, it doesn't matter. The fact that Tibet was an independent nation in the past is indisputable. And what we can do as voting members of this nation, as voting citizens of this country, we can exercise our democratic right to make the argument to our elected representatives that they should recognize that Tibet was an independent country in the past. And this is the declaration issued by the 13th Dalai Lama in 1913. And let's get the text and the copies of this declaration to all the elected representatives, to all the government buildings, to all these officials, leaders in this nation. And let's get them to accept and recognize our history of independence. And secondly, at the practical level, how can we declare independence from the Chinese government? And at the practical level, it is not only Tibetans and Tibet that needs to declare independence from the Chinese government and Chinese influence. It is even Americans who need to declare independence from the influence of Chinese imperialism. When we go to the market, let's look at the things that we are buying. Where are they made? If the cloth or the pants, the shirt or the shoes that you're about to buy were made in China, you can be assured that these commodities were made in prison camps, labor camps, in sweatshops. And in the making of these items, the Chinese government has violated human rights. They have violated religious freedom and freedom of expression. So by making this choice not to buy made in China, we can not only promote human rights, we can not only challenge tyranny, but we can also begin to declare our own independence at the practical level, each time with one action. So these are the two requests I have for all of you tonight. Thank you for joining us, and 2013 will mark 100 years, 100th anniversary of the Tibetan Declaration of Independence, the restoration of Tibetan independence. Let's celebrate 2013. Right now, Tibetans are burning for freedom. Not metaphorically, literally. They are setting themselves on fire to oppose Chinese rule in Tibet, to demand freedom of expression, freedom of religion, to demand that the Chinese government allow His Holiness the Dalai Lama to return home. These are the sacrifices they are making. Just this morning, two young Tibetans, one was 22 years old, the other was 24 years old. They set themselves on fire in Zato, in eastern Tibet, and demanded freedom and the return of the Dalai Lama. Let us keep in mind their sacrifices, and let's continue to make our own sacrifices that we can make financially, economically, practically, physically, psychologically, and mentally, and take every action we can to restore the freedom of Tibet through this non-violent struggle. And once again, I would like to remind everybody that victory for the Tibetan freedom struggle is not a victory for Tibetan